Thank you for joining us for another edition of Focus on America Jump Right In Candidate Edition. We're so glad you joined us, whether you're listening, now or a few months from now. Just we're currently just a few days before the election, the primaries of May 24th that are coming up in Alabama. And this is our candidate series where we jump right in and we ask the tough questions. We want to get beyond the touch points that every candidate is going to tell you, and then they seem to get elected based on their touch points, and there's no meat, and they just get elected and they ride off into the Montgomery sunset. Well, quite frankly, patriots are tired of that. So, with that, let's talk about Focus on America. Focus on America is inspired and compelled by our forefathers, men who risk everything to ensure our freedoms. We encourage Americans to be informed members of their communities, to recruit and develop candidates to restore God given, constitutionally guaranteed liberties, and to replace elected officials who do not represent their constituency or American values. So, we are a grassroots organization formed to promote individual liberty, family values, and the U.S. Constitution by actively participating in the political process. The time for complacency is gone, so we're going to jump right in and let you know that we meet the third Saturday of each month. We host numerous special events like the recent Alabama gubernatorial debate. You can find more information at focusonamerica.us. We have a public and a private page on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Rumble. So wherever you're hearing us, we're glad you're here. And we have a guest today that is ready to jump right in and ready to speak truths. We have with us Mr. Ernie Yarbrough for House District 7. And I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here to join us. I'm going to tell a little bit about you, and then we're going to get to it and let you get into why and what and all those kind of things. Is that good with you?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So with that, I was really impressed when I read his bio, and we don't need to be too impressed by bios because people are going to tell us good things, but I really like the fact that you said, you hope people find a place of encouragement, friendship, and wisdom. And you seek God's direction for some of the most important and foundational areas of our lives. Without God, nothing is possible. And with God, everything everything is possible. So I'm just so happy. And I don't know if I said that backwards, but if I did, what I really meant is nothing is impossible with God. So I'm so happy you're here. He is a freedom fighter. You can visit his website at Yarbrough for House. You'll find that he's a lover of localism as a way to do and think about life. His website is used to encourage you in three areas: faith, family, and business, while also serving as a launch pad for defending, restoring, and supporting these three key components in the halls of our government. He was raised in rural North Alabama, Lawrence County. He was homeschooled and he's now married to his childhood sweetheart. Together they have four precious children on earth, one in heaven. He is a degreed electrical engineer from UAH, worked for 10 years at Nucor Steel in Decatur, and is now self-employed along with his wife, who runs her own amazing health and wellness business. They love family, reading, healthy living, serving in their local church, and working out at CrossFit, and they also homeschool their amazing kiddos. So it looks like his family had a very great impact on his life. They instilled a reading of books. His dad was a serial entrepreneur, and his mother was a tremendous woman of faith. And they have continuously battled for freedom of education on the American homeschool frontier of the 1980s, and he has seen firsthand the importance of standing for our values. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to you. I want you to give us, if I missed anything, please let us know about that if there's something you wanted to point out. But I also want you to share with our audience, why are you running and why now? You've had opportunity. Why was now the defining moment?
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, first of all, on the occasion to just share my heart and my voice. I'm really honored, and I just praise God for the opportunity to hopefully, in this momentous time of history, where it seems like so many people across the country are waking up and getting fired up, and are really getting to be passionate and caring about the things that really matter. So just thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah, so I'd say part of the aspect that I would want to add to what you said, thank you so much for sharing that, would be, I grew up in rural North Alabama on a farm. My dad taught me to work from an early age. I grew up wiring houses and other things, my dad's business in the summer times. By the time I was 16 years old, I had worked or traveled in 45 states. So I grew up working hard. I grew up having kind of the inside track view of entrepreneurial spirit, hard work, passion, taking an idea and bringing that idea to life through hard work and commitment and kind of the whole, making a product or a goods or service first for a purpose, right? Not for a profit. And when that focus was on doing that thing well, then the profit took care of itself, as you focused on doing something with excellence and serving your neighbor and meeting a genuine need. And I never got, my dad to this day is my hero. He is an amazing man of wisdom and business. Um, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to be able to run for office at this point in my life. My dad instilled in me a tremendous love of history, the Bible, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers, uh, St. John's speech, famous speech by Patrick Henry, all those kinds of things. I grew up also heavily influenced by David Barton's Wall Builders, which focused on showing America's Christian heritage and how the Bible influenced public policy and law and all those kinds of things. So, as to why I'm running, the last few years has been hard, especially on a lot of us. But I feel like the last few years is especially to the point that you've said about freedom and people being fired up to make a stand. Common people. The last few years, I think, has really exposed the fact that there is a Republican establishment. Right, there is this idea of these good old boys and this system of leadership that takes the platitudes of conservatism and does not actually believe them or live by them, but is more than happy to take our money and our votes. And so that has always been a burden of mine as I grew up helping different state candidates, knocking doors or putting out signs. Or I went to Team Pact, which is a Christian organization, takes homeschool kids, and you go down to Montgomery and you form your own mock legislative body and bills and all that stuff. But more particularly in the context of why I'm running in District 7. Right, so District 7 is a little bit of Morgan County, all of Lawrence County, and the eastern portion of Colbert County. They just redrew it in the fall. Um, my campaign slogan is to make Alabama local again, right? So I believe strongly that our local values and freedoms and liberties, right, ought to be the basis for how we vote and the decisions that we make. And I'm running particularly in this race because the incumbent, who's a first-year incumbent, um, he when he ran, he made promises that he wanted to see government overreach decrease, right? And he said that households were taxed enough. Well, the first thing that he did almost right away when he got elected was he voted for a gas tax that nobody wanted, which was directly in opposition to what he promised. The second issue was that he twice proposed legislation in terms of guns that would have taken all of the data of law abiding Alabamians at the local sheriff's offices and put it in a centralized database in Montgomery, just like they did in New York, I think in 2012, and that got hacked and all that data got leaked. I found that to be also a violation of his promise that he wanted to decrease government overreach. And kind of the last straw that broke the camel's back for us was medical freedom. And there were some great medical bills that were there to support in special session, and he would not support it. And so that was kind of the last straw. And we kind of put our flag on the hill and we said we're going to run because we want to see somebody. It's not about me, right? It's not about my family. I tell people as I've been knocking doors, there's the cemeteries. The cemeteries are filled with indispensable people, right? None of us are indispensable. We're all going to die, and so we've got to make decisions and policies that look down the road 2 generations, right? Not 1 or 2 election cycles. So we really wanted to see that local emphasis of responsibility, freedoms, and liberties be the controlling voice for Montgomery and for our county and district.
Oh, I love that. And I really like your campaign slogan. I don't think I've heard anyone use that one, even after all these years. So, that I really like that. And that's what we believed as well. So, you mentioned you believe there's a Republican establishment. Do you believe there's a Republican establishment in Alabama?
I most certainly do. There is no other explanation for the fact, for 2 things at least, right? One is, how can we be such a red state and our legislation be so purple. That's one issue. The second issue is I have had a full throttle education in how to analyze, and I kind of you kind of know it, right? But then when you hop into actually being in a campaign, you learn a lot more really quick. It's kind of in your face, and so I've learned how to one quick and easy way to evaluate candidates. A buddy of mine who he's kind of like a super duper conservative campaign manager for state level races in Indiana. And he did this phenomenal Facebook Live, and it was called The Anatomy of a Swamp Funded Candidate. Right. And so what he did was he did a Facebook Live and turned the video around, and he picked one guy running in Indiana, and he just said, let's go down the campaign contribution list, right? PAC, special interest, PAC, special interest, down the list, right? And that was an eye opening thing for me of the wealth of information at our fingertips on that website for Alabama. And so as I began to do that, and then I began to see in my own race that my opponent has almost 100% of his funding, over 99% from special interests and PACs, and mine is predominantly from local people. It began to become very clear to me that there only is there an establishment on the basis of how what is voted for and what is not supported, but in how these men and women are funded as well.
Absolutely. And since you mentioned that, um, yes, we are, ranked. We are red. Alabama's red. Everybody's like, oh, well, Alabama's such a red state. Well, we are on the surface, but we're also ranked in the top 5 for corruption. Well, there is a reason for that. And, with what you said, they how do you feel about limiting? I know all PACs are not bad PACs, but we are seeing, like you've just mentioned, we are seeing so many candidates that 90%, 60% of their fundings coming from out of district or PACs. So how do you feel about limiting PACs, or should there be a limit of PACs? Should there be a limit on donations? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I personally would not have a problem limiting PACs because I feel like that. There's a Bible verse, and it was at Psalm 27, I think, where it says, he says, Lord, guide me in a plain path, right? A plain path. Think of it as a path of principle, right? And so we've taken a little bit of money from a PAC, but it's the Alabama Freedom PAC. And the only reason why we took that is because their sole purpose is to promote the liberties and freedoms of the Alabama individuals. But I have made sure that the overwhelming majority of my donations is from just local people. And that's on purpose. Um, I've gotten contacted by other PACs, and I'm like, no, thank you. I appreciate your contacting me, but we're good, and have a nice day or whatever, right? Because I don't want their money. If I take money, would it be a bad thing to have like a Liberty Caucus or a Liberty PAC where they say we're going to vet people and they're going to swear allegiance to the liberties of the people, the freedoms, righteousness, and truth, and those things? Well, that may not be a bad thing, right? That PAC doesn't really exist yet, but the reality is that um, when you run for office, I believe, is a matter of honor and principle, and that lead me in a plain path kind of thing. That the relationship, person to person, and the financial relationship ought to be absolutely dominated by the local people that you are supposed to represent.
Absolutely. I agree with you on those things. And another thing is, if you go to Montgomery, we've spent a lot of time in Montgomery pushing for bills, legislation for the people, medical freedom, election integrity, all of those things. And it is like swimming in a den of snakes. It's such a spiritual battle. And most people do not realize when you go there, the average voter or citizen doesn't have the opportunity to go, and they don't realize that down both halls there's these lobbyists that are represented by big name organizations, big pharma, medical association, different things like that. With all that going on, how will you protect yourself spiritually, and how do you feel about, and what will you do to hold yourself accountable?
That's a fantastic question. Number one is I believe that birds of a feather flock together, right? We've heard that. The book of Proverbs says that companions of wise men will be wise, but companions of fools will be destroyed. And so, one of the things that I have decided and intended to do is I'm handpicking a council of godly men and women who will not only be my support team and my counselors, but I'm also intending to every time that I have to go down to Montgomery, my desire and goal is to take at least one person with me, if not more, because um, I think that is something that even when you're there, if you're there with righteous people of the same character and passion and commitment, right? It, if we don't have that in a high enough number yet in terms of representatives or senators, right? If I have to bring some of my own down there to protect myself and to send a message, right? A gracious, humble, but freedom message that I'm not here to be part of a club. I'm here to represent the people of Alabama and to do what's right. So I have every intention of surrounding myself, of actually taking people with me when I go down there, because I have no desire to put myself in a place of political or moral compromise.
Excellent.
I like to think that I have at least some idea that is a spiritual battle, and there are in people who are enemies to all the things that are good and decent and moral. um, but that is my plan. I do not plan to vote alone, as it were, nor do I even plan literally to go down there alone.
Perfect. So my next question would be, do you support the would you support legislation that would allow the legislature to call itself back into session?
Absolutely. This actually the historical. We have all of our kids have historical names, right? And one of my son's names, who's two, is Haddon Cromwell Yarbrough, right? And so Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. This goes back to the battles between Parliament and the King in England. And there was this big battle because the king would just walk in. The General Assembly of the Church of Scotland had to have permission from the king, and Parliament had to have permission from the king to assemble itself. And then if the parliament was going the direction the king didn't like, he would just walk up in that joint and say that he dissolved parliament, go home, right? And so that was one of the things that led to, the Lord Protectorate, Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, having a civil war in England that led to greater freedoms for the English people. So it is absolutely essential that the legislative body be able to call itself into session.
Absolutely. Kay Ivey didn't want to because she said there were a bunch of slow moving turtles. So that's an important question for us. And the our membership pushed really hard. The only two people for the audience that's not aware in the state of Alabama, the only way you can be called back into a special session is by the governor or the Speaker of the House, which was Mac McCutcheon, or the Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth, which both failed us drastically. We approached them and asked them to put it in writing, which is allowed by the Constitution of the state of Alabama, to put it in writing to the governor to request a special session. Yes, the governor could have denied that, but they didn't even go the step that the Constitution allows them. So it makes us wonder, why did our legislators not want to go back into session? So on another subject of talking about limiting powers and things like that, we would like to, how do you feel about limiting the powers of the state health officer, and if you do support it, how would you suggest we go about doing that?
Yeah, 100%. Look, the reality is that we're supposed to be a representative nation, right? And so whenever you have unelected officials exerting influence, power, and especially to that level, right, on the state, it is absolutely essential because here's what happens. It feels like what happens, like Congress, for example. Think about the federal Congress, and they'll create these alphabet soup organizations like the CDC or OSHA or the FDA or the whatever FBI, CIA, whatever, right? And then those organizations will speak and issue basically law, right, or authoritative whatever. And Congress, it feels like oftentimes to the average American, Congress is over there washing their hands like, well, they spoke all. It's like no, they work for you and you work for us. Like they're under your control, right? They're under your authority. And it's the same. It ought to be the same with the state health officer, where there is, I think, what would be a wise solution would be that there ought to be no possibility for someone like the state health officer to issue a state of emergency without the approval of the legislative body.
Uh, that's right. And again, for our members who may not be aware, we are the only state in the nation that has a state health officer that is appointed by a lobbyist group and that has zero accountability to anyone except that group. That in itself is corrupt. No matter what you call it or how you feel about what went down, that in itself is corrupt. When there's no accountability, it's a breeding ground for corruption. So we have to be aware of that. So we'll go on to the next question. A very important topic for Alabamians is education, especially K through 12. And it has been widely claimed that Common Core does not exist in Alabama. Well, we have a little bit of a contradiction there, or should I say a $90 million contradiction with the Numeracy Act. The Numeracy Act sounds good on the surface. It was made so that it would help our students learn math. It would allow for math coaches to be in our school. Well, on the surface, that sounds, oh, that's a really good thing. It helped bring up our math numbers. However, those math coaches are to teach our teachers how to teach math. Why are we, if we are not using Common Core, why are we having to spend $90 million a year to teach our teachers how to teach? Isn't that the reason they went to college? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my father-in-law is he's a very wise man, a farmer. He's a country guy, but he also was a master of Greek and Hebrew. So let's just say he has one eye and half sense, right? So he would say anybody with one eye and half sense could look at that and say there's multiple problems with that. Number one, to your point, like is it really a sign of the effectiveness of our educational system that we have to hire math tutors to teach math teachers how to teach math to kids? I mean, that sounds like the song that never ends, right? Like, at what point do we stop and say maybe we should just fix our K through 12 and our college degree process so that whatever we're expecting the teachers to teach is so simple and straightforward, right? With education and applying themselves, they can teach it. And to your point, that is a smoking gun because everybody, I mean, Common Core has earned the reputation that it is confusing, it is not intuitive, it's ineffective, right? And you have tried and true methods of teaching the basics of education. And as we have adopted these new methods, new ideologies, right, our educational process has gotten better, right? No, it's gotten worse. To where it's a thing now where we even graduate young people who can't read or can barely read, and certainly then don't have basic math skills. So I think it is an absolute waste of money, and it is trying to put lipstick on a pig in order to deal with an issue that is. I mean, like what you would just like to ask them, what are you hoping to accomplish? Like, what is your purpose here? And yes, it's a smoking gun for the fact that the math they're teaching is confusing.
Absolutely. And think about it. I kind of look at it like, let's say I take a drug that gives me a side effect. And then the same company who sold me that drug that caused me harm now has the cure. Well, a lot of people don't realize the people who sold us Common Cure are now, Common Core is now offering us the cure in the Numeracy Act. So it's like another another smoking gun of I will create the problem and sell you the cure as well. So we just want our members to be aware of that. And another great concern for our parents is parental choice as far as mask mandates, their critical race theory, or its new name, social emotional learning. Social emotional learning has is a new name for critical race theory, and it's being celebrated by our House leadership. Nathaniel Ledbetter sponsored a bill, I believe it was HB 123, that actually requires a mental health officer in our in our grade school. Actually, I believe it's all K through 12 schools, and it can do it without parental permission. Well, we had a midnight deal where we were able to get that up, an amendment to it, so that parents have to opt in up to age 14. But after that, you can have socio emotional learning counseling at school without parental concern. Well, I don't know about you. You were probably a much better child than I was. But if my parents grounded me from something, my phone, or I couldn't go here or I couldn't go there, that's such a critical age that I could have gone and said, my parents are being mean to me. Well, now that puts me on a list. They don't have to contact my parents. It opens the door for social services to question my parents. And I'm not saying by any means if a child is having a problem that we shouldn't investigate it, that there's not a time and place for that. But I think we have to be really careful on overstepping privacy and what is a parent's choice and what's the government is allowed to do. What are your thoughts on mask mandates, critical race theory, social emotional learning, vaccine choice? How do you feel?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you for asking. First of all, there's principled issues, there's common sense issues with this. You know, kind of in line with that. He's telling these little kids they can pick their gender. I saw a funny Facebook graphic. It said, "I'm thankful that my parents didn't let me pick my gender when I was still eating crowns and boogers." you know,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely,
so
right?
so so there's that issue, right? But fundamentally, this it highlights the fact that we have that establishment leadership that does not first and foremost begin to address questions and problems from a place of principle. Here's a great here's a great litmus test. Is this discussion and are the solutions we are offering in line with Article 1, Section 35 of the Alabama State Constitution, right? That the sole and only legitimate end of government is to protect the citizen in his life, liberty, and property. When government becomes abusive of those ends, right, it is usurpation and oppression. So that's a great filter through which to pass all of this stuff. But fundamentally, the question ought to be asked, who has God given these children to as their first line of defense, protectors, providers, caregivers? It is parents. And I say this as someone who, back in the 80s, our friends went to jail for homeschooling. We were part of rallies. We had to draw a line in the sand and stand for our freedoms because it was constant that leadership and big PACs and organizations wanted to strip away the rights, freedom, and freedoms of parents in order to make the state operate in the role of the parent. And it's absolutely evil. It is wrong. It's like, these institutions are supposed to exist to support, empower, and promote the parent-child relationship, not to undermine it. It's just like another classic example. You think about constitutional carry and police. Look, the police are there to support our rights and to promote our rights and to serve and protect our rights and freedoms, right? So con carry and policemen are not at odds with each other, and if they are at odds in somebody's mind, their thinking is wrong, right? So it gets back to the fact that whether it's masking for your kids, whether it's vaccines for your kids, those decisions do not fundamentally belong to the government. It is not theirs to make. They have no right to make those decisions or to force those decisions on other people. It's just flat out wrong and immoral and evil.
Thank you for those answers. The last question, and then we'll move to the lightning round, is according to the National Association of the State Budget Officers, the state of Alabama in fiscal year 2021 had expenditures of over $31 billion. Dollars. There was a $1.3 billion surplus. There are ARPA funds that have yet to be distributed, and the taxes are still rising. In fact, Amendment 1 would authorize the state to borrow $85 million for our state parks, except for the Confederate Park in, I believe it's Marbury or something like that. Anyway, how is it how is it physical responsibility or accountability of any kind if we have funds yet we're borrowing funds and yet we have access but we didn't repeal the gas tax? What are your thoughts on those items?
Yeah, it is. It is the height of fiscal irresponsibility. A classic case in point, right? So they passed the gas tax that nobody wanted. They rammed it through year three before, right? They pushed it. It died year four. Crickets because it's election year, 2 weeks in or whatever, just shortly there, and they got to have it. So then we have people in leadership across our state who go and encourage counties to float bonds against the expected revenue of the gas tax. So now we have leaders who have created financial sledgehammers to smash the heads of counties to try to discourage them from removing the gas tax. So the same thing with we have a surplus, but we're going to borrow money. Since when did it become the philosophy of financial responsibility to tax and borrow on the basis and to borrow on those taxes, right? Or to like you are literally stomping on the heads of our children and our grandchildren. It is it is it is financially criminal to do such things. Um, and it also, again, highlights the fact that they do not either understand or they just hate and will not operate from a basis of conservative fiscal responsibility. A basic litmus test of economics, as someone who's worked in business my whole life, is this: you let Alabama taxpayers keep more of their money. You let businesses have lower taxes and less burdensome regulations on their businesses. Then what happens is businesses have more resources to create jobs, to create better goods and services. Alabamians have more money to go buy those better goods and services. It generates more sales tax, and a rising tide raises all ships. But instead, the fiscal policy that our state seems to love to pursue is tax, 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 and borrow, borrow, borrow. And that is nothing but a recipe for stomping on the heads of our kids and our grandchildren. And um, ideas that could be floated to be fiscally responsible could be: number one, why don't we unify our budget? Right. Number two, why don't we level fund our budget so that the excess above the level funding can go back into things like tax rebates, like paying off state debt, like infrastructure, right? And when you do that and you revitalize you and empower individuals and businesses, that causes more business to grow, more sales to occur. Like Margaret Thatcher, right? Wasn't it Margaret Thatcher after World War II? She revitalized England by privatizing all kinds of industries and getting the government out of business. And when that happened, it was like an incredible jolt forward for the English economy. So, this just highlights the fact of the establishment who are more socialist in their philosophy and who are not true fiscal conservatives, and they do not either they do not understand or they despise principles of the free market that actually lead to prosperity and blessing, because it leads to decentralized em- financial empowerment of individuals and businesses, and then the state gets blessed through the blessing of the individual to the blessing of the business. Not, hey, all the blessing comes to Montgomery, and then they dole it out to whoever they see fit. So it
Well,
is
I
a
think you
fun.
just
It's
cracked the code there. I think the code was, well, it's not going to help them in Montgomery, and it's no longer about constituents for most. I think you did an excellent job of cracking that code.
Thank you. I mean, it's just my dad is a brilliant businessman, economist, and we talk about this stuff all the time. We're always analyzing this together, and he's been such a blessing and a help to me. And so, I think when you look at it through that lens, it's like, how in COVID, it seems like COVID, there's been a huge rush of parents to get involved across the country. And it's like certain lies have kind of fallen from the eyes of people and their trust in some of these man made institutions. And I feel like that what's happening, whether it's with the Republican establishment, would you believe there's a pro life establishment? There's a economic conservative establishment, that these lies are falling from the eyes of people like scales that are coming off. And when they see through the lies, what has been seen cannot be unseen. But what's exciting there is that they realize the power and the blessing of operating by good principle. And freedom is an amazing thing. It's a fun thing. It's a generational changing thing.
It is, and it's beyond time that we change that for our future generations. So now we're going to go into the lightning round questions. These are yes or no, and we will leave it at that. And then I will pass it back to you for you to close out. Tell people where they should go, who they should vote for on May 24th, how they can get in touch with you, how they can find out more information. So the first question will be: are you in favor of monopoly-run casinos in Alabama?
No,
Are you aware of the Montgomery pick list?
only recently.
Okay, and for our audience who does not know what the Montgomery Pick List is, our so-called leadership in Montgomery has colluded to make a list and pass it around so that the good old boys will support the people that will do their bidding and keep them in legislature, not necessarily represent the people. So the next question would be, do you believe the COVID-19 vaccine is beneficial?
No.
Will you support bills like this session's SB 312 and HB 31?
Yes.
Would you support legislation to remove unconstitutional regulations and permits involving oil and gas exploration, production, and transportation?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you wrap it up for us? Tell us how to get in touch with you, how people can learn more, how they can help you between now and the primary on May 24th.
Yes, thank you. So I would just like to humbly ask for your vote because if you are burdened about the direction of our country and our District 7 as a part of that, and you want to see a return to a principled position and a principled lens, a principled commitment of hard work and passion to truth as the lens through which solutions are developed and made, I humbly believe that that context of making Alabama local again is that I'm the best candidate. I'm the best choice. I'm the most principled conservative. I'm also the most experienced conservative who, in terms of industry and business and education, I've taught K through fourth. I've taught high school. I ran the Calhoun Community College Math Lab for 2 years. I've taught in private, home, and public education. I've run my business successfully for several years as well as working in industry. So not only do I have the experience, but I have, I believe, the principled commitment to make decisions that will protect our freedoms and our liberties while moving us forward in a sustainable way of excellent growth that will be there for our children and our children's children. As far as getting a hold of me, you can get me if you go to ernieyarbrough.com. You can see my website there. There's a contact form. You can also click over from there to our Facebook page, Yarbrough for House District 7, and you can shoot us a Facebook message as well. And then on my Facebook page there, you'll also see a number that you can call as well. And so we want to make ourselves available. We've knocked about 5,000 doors, and that's how passionate we are for making a difference in this race and hopefully a shot heard around the state, as it were, and even the country.
Absolutely. We dare defend our rights and take back Bama. So I just want to tell you thank you so much for taking the opportunity to speak to our members, to discuss your platform, to move beyond the touch points of the Good Old Boy Network. And thank you. We'll be praying for you. We wish you the best of luck. Our Focus on America members are thrilled that they have other options beside the status quo. So thank you. Thank your family. We pray blessings over you, and we hope you have a great day. And everyone go out to the polls on the primaries. Be sure to cast your vote. That's May 24th for the primaries in the state of Alabama. We wish you all a great day, and we will talk with you all soon. Join us on the next edition of Jump Right In with Focus on America. Follow us on YouTube, on Rumble. Be sure and get in touch with us at focusonamerica.us. Everyone have a great day.